Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Emmanuel Faber, Chairman and CEO of food and beverage company Danone. Many thanks for joining us today at our Agricultural and Food Summit. I'm in Brussels, but we're talking via screens. We're going to dive straight in because we have a limited time, but before that, just a reminder that you are very much encouraged to submit questions via the Slido app, and you can tweet about the event with the hashtag #PoliticoAgriFood. Mr. Faber, I'd like to start with what's been in all of our minds for months, the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, and especially on the food sector, which obviously has been hugely impacted. You are in a very central position in the food system. Can you tell us a bit more, 6 months into the crisis, what was the impact on your sector? What has changed in the way you do business and you do food business?
Well, thank you, Marion, and thank you for hosting me in this so important event that Politico is having in the current context, and certainly the context in Europe with everything that is going on with the Green Deal and with the Common Agricultural Policy reform. So there couldn't be a better time to actually discuss these topics. Clearly, we need to embark the consequences of the COVID on the food system if we want those policies to reach their goals in Europe. And you're right, yes, many things have changed when it comes to the food sector and our own business after the COVID and in the COVID. The first thing for us has been that we really wanted to make sure that our people would be safe at work, understanding that right after health, it became very clear for everyone, governments, but of course citizens, that food was the second most important thing after being treated for the health issues related to COVID. And so we worked a lot with governments in France, in Europe, with the commissioner, to make sure that there would be green corridors that would allow the necessary ingredients and supplies that would allow the food chain to continue to work and make sure that people would have what they would need during this crisis. We've seen how delicate it was with some pantry loading and panic buying. Really, the whole idea that food was taken for granted disappeared with the COVID, and I think it will stay for a long time. The notion that food is also at the core of your overall health condition, I think is going to stay here, in particular because unfortunately we've seen all the comorbidity factors of food-related and lifestyle-related diseases such as diabetes, obesity, and others. And so this concern that food and health are related is going to be there. And the last thing I would say is the planet. There are many. You could say that this crisis has put the planet on the back burner. I don't think that's the case. I think it's absolutely central to address the way the food system can be resilient in the future. So the One Planet, One Health framework of action of Danone, I think, is one that puts us right at the heart of the questions and trying to find the answers for the future here.
Thank you. You talked about the green corridors, and obviously there hasn't really been like any kind of food shortage. So in that sense, the system has worked. But still, there were kind of disruptions. For instance, for farming, with seasonal workers being kind of shut down out of countries where they used to work. Would you say overall that the EU has kind of risen up to the challenge, or that still we have seen some kind of big policy and political gaps?
I think really that EU did a great job, and the governments with whom we have been working hand in hand, really. I mean, every week, sometimes every day, for the first 3 months of the crisis, have done a great job when it comes to ensuring the food supply to their population. Of course, there have been ups and downs. The panic buying didn't help. Because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the containment of those, which happened very soon in the process, I think has shown that we took things, the industry, but also the farming organizations, the government, labor ministers, economy ministers, agriculture ministers, the commissioners. I think there was a whole network of collaboration that showed that Europe, compared to many other areas where we operate, did it right. It tested the limit of a system, and it showed where the limits of the systems are. So that's a big learning in terms of we should stop basically running food on a just-in-time basis and thinking that food is just another commodity or just another consumer good. It's not. It's a fundamental right and it's a fundamental need, human need. And therefore, in a COVID world, we need to think about it in the just in case. And I think coming from just in time to just in case is going to be a huge change for the industry. And that's what we have learned in 3 months with all the governments and the EU.
Thank you. Many would say, and as you pointed out, compared to other areas, that the EU is kind of heading in the right direction, but sometimes a bit too slowly. I believe you're due in Brussels fairly soon. What will you tell EU policymakers? Like, what will be your key message? What urgent actions need to be taken?
Well, my key message is that the sovereignty of Europe, the food sovereignty of Europe is critical. It's critical from a democratic standpoint because it's an ask by citizens. They do not take any more food for granted. So they want to understand how they will have their ability to be autonomous and get the food they want. And clearly, Europe does import way too much of its food inputs, in particular proteins. We are heavily dependent on imported deforesting proteins, in particular for livestock and cattle raising in the EU. So we need to change that. That's the first thing, and evolve towards a model of agriculture that will, in essence, sink carbon back in the soil. We need to the whole system needs to start back from the health of soil. It's as simple as that. That's what this concept that we've created several years ago of regenerative agriculture. By going for too monocropping, focus too much on the power of the plant instead of looking at the power of the soil itself, we have degraded land. 40% of lands are degraded around the world. And therefore, it means that there won't be farming available and possible in the next generation. So if we want a resilient system, we need to sink carbon back in the soil because carbon is about 60% of the organic matter. And therefore, it is the life in the soil itself. By doing this, we will be able to avoid all the chemical and synthetical entrants that are currently being still used, and we need to shift subsidies towards a system where basically soil is, for me, the center of the nature-based solutions for a food system. We have disconnected our food system from nature. We've thought that with our science and technology, we could just use soil as a support for the plant, and the magic of our technology would bring the plants that would be doing miracles. Actually, this is creating monoculture, and the fact that we rely on only 6 overall plants for 75% of the caloric need of humankind is certainly not the right thing to do in times like these ones, and is a heavy problem in terms of food security. So I would urge the EU policymakers to invest in an agriculture system that sinks carbon back into the soil, and therefore that valorizes and monetizes the carbon that regenerative agriculture can put in the soil. And then I would shift, and then I stop, I would shift gradually out of too much meat-based animal protein in order to make sure that the flexibility of our diet would reduce diabetes and obesity over time, lowering the health costs for healthy aging of Europe, and at the same time reduce the pressure on soils and stop the imports so that we are able to manage our food system in an autonomous basis in Europe.
Thank you. I'll come back on food sovereignty in a bit, but since you mentioned the need to shift away from meat and on protein, I mean, Danone has been investing a lot in recent years in plant-based products and beverages, but still milk and dairy is kind of one of your core businesses. I read a French news story that described your recent strategy as preparing for post-milk world. Is that an accurate description?
It's an inaccurate description in the sense that, at least in my generation, I don't think there will be a post-milk world. There is one thing very important with the milk protein, the animal milk protein. That's the only protective protein source for human health. Plant-based is an immense, tremendously rich kingdom that we don't know so much. We know some very important ones, like soy, for instance, and many others. But even soy, which is by far the richest in protein, in essential amino acids for human health, in terms of balance, is not providing an excess and therefore a protection, given some deficiencies that we have across Europe in some important amino acids. So the only one that brings this protective level is the milk that comes from animals. So for that particular reason, I think milk is going to be, in the pyramid of any sustainable food system in the future. It does not mean that you cannot be flexible, and that's where the flexibility is so important. I'm not speaking about stopping meat. I'm speaking about, even for meat, less meat volumes but better quality. As much as the same should apply in many directions in order to rebalance the system. So it's not about one or the other, it's an and that balance is well enough and to make sure that we transition towards a world that works. In particular, for one reason also, which is that one of the reasons why greenhouse gas emissions are high in the animal raising activities is because of the food that they get. They're getting food that is not the food that they were supposed naturally to get. If you turn from compounds, grains, to linseed and grass, you can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of ruminants by up to 70 or 80%. So there is still a huge work to do on the sustainability of animal farming in Europe. But animal farming is much needed in any case to balance the overall system in agriculture.
You talked about food sovereignty, and of course, when you say food sovereignty, some hear or scream protectionism. How is it different, and how can you still build a food system that is inclusive on a global scale?
Yes. When I speak about food sovereignty, I think we need to understand that it does not mean autarcy. It's not against other people, it's not close to other people, but it's in control. The just in case. So that you have backups and you know that your network of partners share the same view. I'm okay to go for the Mercosur agreement if the Mercosur agreement does not provide imports in EU of agricultural models that are deforesting and that are hurting the health of soil, as they do from some of Latin American countries. So we cannot have that. That is not sovereignty. Sovereignty is to trade with partners in a manner that's balanced. There is one rule, and that's how we want to work. The other very important point is that I think we need to, we've built a food system overall since 100 years probably that did absolute miracles in terms of lowering down the cost of calories. And in some cases, that led some of us to even use too many calories. Hence, the 2 billion people that are overweight, 1 billion people around the world, the 500 million that are suffering diabetes. So it means we need to rebalance our approach to food, first of all. And second, the diminishing and reducing the cost is not the long-term option. Today, we do not pay food at its replacement cost because we don't pay the carbon that is extracted by agriculture and therefore, or the water that we're losing in water irrigation, the erosion of soils, for instance, the lack of biodiversity, cultivated biodiversity. We absolutely need to increase that. And so if you capture all of this, it means that the sovereignty starts with a food system that relies on local systems, first of all, because there is a reason why the food traditions, the food culture, the diets are so different. It's simply because the local ingredients were different. And they were different because the natural ecosystems were different. And only if we restart from that reality that climate change will hurt, but in a very different manner, only if we look back at the local agricultural reality, then we will think about how it can bring a local food system that works. And then everyone knows that we will need to continue to trade as we did in the past, and probably, and I'm simply saying, we need to do that in a balanced way with a common view of what agriculture and food means, with how many or whatever number of countries that are ready to do this, partners and companies and farmers that are ready to have the same approach to this.
Talking about health and common views on food, there is one specific battle that is very much on in Brussels and in the EU on front of pack labeling, and I'm talking especially about Nutriscore label, which is a kind of traffic light system that you've supported, but other countries and other leaders of the food sectors are very adamant that it's a bad system that kind of penalizes legacy foods such as, the Italian legacy foods such as olive oil or Parmigiano. What do you tell them? Why do you think this is a better system than others?
Well, I'm not sure it's a better than others. I think we need one system, and we think it's a good system. That's why, we decided to be among the very first companies in Europe to pilot that for the governments. And that's out of several months, a year of study on consumer reaction, consumer understanding, consumer behavior, that the government and the EU decided on the basis of our own, tests, and a number of other companies test gradually, that should be the system. We are having discussions all around the world with governments, and governments are having discussions about nutritional label front of pack. And I can tell you that Nutri-Score is by far the one that I think is the best. It's very simple, and for me, it does not in any way prevent consumers to choose products that would not be A, that could be B, C, or D, E, whatever, but they need to know. And it will allow them to understand that going for those will have consequences that they have to manage. And of course, it's not the only criteria for choosing a product. There are many others, and you're citing these wonderful products from Italy. And of course, that will not stop people from, using olive oil, because olive oil is, by the way, bringing many, many other nutrients that you would not be able to find in a sort of a one system. But the transparency about the most important consequences on the health of people is critical to reconnect consumers with the brands that they are using, by having an independent, trusted system that shows that the brand is willing to be transparent. This simple willingness of being transparent with one system, I think, is one important aspect that is then allowing the consumers to take the product and look at the smaller print and understand what are the various parameters, nutritional parameters, but also agricultural parameters, social parameters of that product. And I think we were speaking about sovereignty. That's what people want. They want their own food sovereignty. They want to take back the control that they gave to large brands and large agricultural companies in the past. Because, and again, I think even more with COVID, they will not take their food for granted. So we needed one system. It's among the good systems. And it's great that it can be pan-European, because of course there are so many exchanges and trade and how products are traveling within Europe that it's very important that we just have one.
Thank you. We only have 5 minutes left, and I would like to remind our audience that they can ask questions via Slido. I'd like to just come back a bit on your personal background, because, of course, in 2016, you became a sort of a star CEO in France, following a very kind of personal and inspirational speech to business graduates. And you advocated at the time for a change in our economic model. You called on young graduates to care about social justice and live their lives a bit differently. Do you feel that now, 4 years later, this message resonates more or less, and especially among your fellow CEOs?
I don't know. That was a message at one point in time, and I know it sort of resonates from time to time, and that's, what I can see is that I feel that many of my peers, I'm now co-chairing the Consumer Goods Forum. For 2 years, it will be over in the middle of next year. Consumer Goods Forum is assembling 400 of the largest retail and food manufacturers, and actually non-food as well. And so, I have a vast horizon of colleagues to speak to there, and I can testify that many of them understand that we are not in a world of business as usual. That you cannot put just your CSR strategy, somewhere on the front page of your annual report or somewhere in the department on the third floor, and that you send talking to media and to politics. I think they understand that sustainability is now part of the mainstream. There won't be resilience without sustainability being at the core of business, and this is why we launched, for instance, a year ago during the UN week, exactly a year ago, a coalition of businesses for biodiversity. 25 of the largest businesses that around the globe are extracting resources from the soil and transforming them into textile, cosmetics, hygiene, food, beverages, etc. We pledged to increase the level of biodiversity that we source from agriculture. So more traditional seeds, different seeds, varieties that have been not used for some time and that could adapt to climate change, etc. To rebuild this missing link of biodiversity in agriculture, which is so imperative in terms of nature-based solutions for the future. And that goes hand to hand with soil health. So these 25 CEOs are not dreamers. They've joined because they know that we as an industry need to align on this. So I think, yes, the current circumstances are raising everyone's awareness that we need to look beyond our strict P&L in a way as a business and think about our broader impact on communities and over time.
Thank you. Talking about broader impact, I know that last year you were asked by French President Emmanuel Macron to contribute with other CEOs on thoughts and reflection on how to improve the kind of climate footprint and prepare for the future world. How is that going, and are you still contributing to the kind of political thinking of the French president?
Well, you'd have to ask him, but we were basically contributing on two horizons. One was on the One Planet Summit, this junction 1 year ago between the climate agenda and the nature agenda that happened, and it was frankly the first time and so important because you cannot deal with climate and CO2 without dealing with biodiversity loss. The two work together. And that is the essence, and this is where this One Planet Business for Biodiversity coalition that I just mentioned was launched with the support of the French presidency to start with. The other thing which I think is equally important is an initiative that we launched during the G7 in Biarritz under the French presidency called Business for Inclusive Growth. That is also started under President Macron's sponsorship and stewardship as a small group around him, where we used an initiative that Danone had started with OECD as a knowledge partner to think and act on business models that would by design be more inclusive than traditional business approach, I would say. And President Macron really wanted the G7 French presidency to use the inclusiveness of growth as a clear deliverable. And so we launched that platform with about 40 companies that have pledged and that are currently working with ILO, the trade unions, but also OECD in terms of metrics on how do we design a more inclusive approach to economy. Back to what you shared about my message in 2016, I don't think that there will be a resilient market economy if it is not driven by the purpose of social justice. There will not be climate justice without social justice anyway. So what we see today, I mean, frankly, shows that if you look at the climate marches and the younger generation that started that 2 years ago now, but now the COVID crisis, these topics are here on the table. That again, there will be millions of jobs, 500 million of jobs, said ILO. My friend Guy Ryder yesterday said, the head of ILO, that 500 million jobs had been lost in the 6 months of COVID. And this is the usual jobs, the ones of the most vulnerable. So there is no way that we can live in peace without making sure that our businesses are more inclusive, and there is no way that there will be business resilience if there is no peace. And so that's why I think, yes, that continues to work, and I think it's a fundamental for businesses going forward. And frankly, I think there is a big topic for Europe here, because Europe has this opportunity now to rebuild, reconnect to what is the DNA of economy in Europe. What does it mean to be a business in Europe? It's got to be different from what we see in the US, from which we've borrowed a lot and maybe too much. And it's got to be different from what we see in China, which is its own logic. But what about Europe now? What is our identity? What is the purpose of doing business? How much social and environmental topics need to be embarked in the bylaws, in the laws that run businesses in Europe? And I think, the history of capitalism and economy in Europe is there, very rich, to build a solid, different narrative for economy. And I think that's what we also need going through the Green Deal, to build a resilient recovery for Europe.
Thank you. All very big questions for Europe to tackle, and I'm sure will keep our political leaders busy in the coming weeks and months. I'd like to thank you. I believe we've run out of time, but thanks much for answering my questions and sharing your thoughts. We are moving on to our next panel discussion, which is a focus on EU-Africa partnering for food security. So please stay tuned. Thank you very much, Emmanuel Faber, for joining us today.
Thank you, Marion. Be well.